federal government alone spends $4.5 billion a year locking up people for drug offenses. It costs almost $28,000 a year just to incarcerate one prisoner. Compare that to the average annual tuition at a 4-year public college, which is $5,491, and you realize that the drug war is blurring our nation's priorities. Taxpayers' money would be much better spent educating people instead of punishing them. But thanks to ever-increasing mandatory minimum drug sentences, an entire class of young people are being filtered into new supermax prisons, while the resulting budget crunch forces the rest of us to go to old, dilapidated schools. The more money we dump into prisons, the less we have to invest in college campuses. Visit www.schoolsnotprisons.com to find out how you can get involved in the war against the war on drugs.
I can say what I want.
Yeah, but if you're a current kind of guy, stay.
If you're current, you've got, and this goes back to the history of police are supposed to be separate from politics, so that's where that comes from. Yes, sir.
This is a little follow-up to the gentleman with the beard's question about what they do after legalization. I'd imagine it would be much different than when after Prohibition ended.
Exactly.
They did say they were sorry.
Actually, you know, the situation we've got right now and the end of alcohol prohibition are very similar. It was the end of the Great Depression. Governments at all levels were starving for money. And here's an easy resource. Putting marijuana in a legal context, just at the farm level alone. Marijuana is bigger than peanuts in Georgia, bigger than tobacco in South Carolina. It's the number 2 cash crop in the country, and in most states it's number 1. So just at that level, I mean, we could gain significant revenue from it. Yes, sir.
Is it true that psychedelic usage disqualifies you from being a police officer or an FBI agent?
I can only speak to Cincinnati, and it does not automatically. Timing is important, age is important. You know, there's a lot more factors than just single use. Yes, sir.
I was just wondering if you would mention a little bit about the question that Leaf got to ask to the president in the YouTube interview.
Yeah, I'm following that a little bit, but I haven't heard the outcomes.
I mean, just for people who haven't seen it, the president did a YouTube interview where questions got to be proposed, and Leaf got the #1 voted question. And out of the questions, out of the top 200 questions, 198 of the top 200 questions were drug policy related. So we finally got the president's attention, and it was the first time I've seen him answer it with any kind of seriousness. Because the last time he did something like this, they asked the question, he literally just laughed it off, and was like, "Well, I wonder what that says about the people who are watching this online or whatever." But this time, like, it was a Leap officer who proposed the question, you know, should we look at legalization? And although he said that he doesn't support legalization, he said it's a perfectly legitimate topic for debate. Now, a lot of his response to that was the same old stuff, but the fact that he came out and said that it's a legitimate topic for debate is actually a step.
Yeah, everybody here remembers Bill Clinton's famous statement. You know, he says, "I was in England in 1992, and I smoked marijuana, and I didn't inhale, and I didn't like it." And President Obama shows a little more honesty. He says, "When I was a kid, I inhaled frequently. That was the whole point." So, you know, we've got political leadership, Supreme Court justices, all these politicians, and generally when they talk about it, it's kind of like, I was a misguided kid one time, and man, come on, give me a break. So, you know, hopefully things will change, but the hypocrisy is a little bit astounding to me. Yes, sir.
Right, it's also the hypocrisy comment you just made. Do you mean that when you say like the judges and like the police officers that involved like the marijuana case you said, most of them is probably smokers, still smokers? What did you mean by that comment when you said that? Do you remember you said that 12 years ago?
Well, surveys of American adults, 40% of Americans have smoked marijuana. So if I apply that to judgeships, I don't know why they're any different. Judges, lawyers, I mean, lawyers are famous for alcoholism. I don't know why they would bypass marijuana. And I'm not throwing stones at anybody. There's political considerations for these folks, and that's their oxygen. That's how they live. So they're careful with what they say. Yes, sir.
So going back to the heroin, crack cocaine, meth topic, you were saying that rehab is one of the ways that we can start getting people off. And I don't know the technical term or legal term that it would be. Well, how do you feel of a city or state-sponsored kind of weaning off program where someone admits, I'm a heroin addict, and then you go in for a daily dosage? Or
here's the problem. Why do drug addicts in general, and I'm including alcoholics, why don't they get treatment? What stops them from getting treatment?
Clarity.
Denial. Denial that it's a problem.
Stigma.
And stigma. And one of the things we can do by erasing, taking out the criminal justice process, and what Portugal did was replace that with a civil process, where you go in a room and the magistrate, it's not a judge, they sit at the same level with you, they're not up in their robe. All the trappings of criminal justice are taken away from it. And the whole thrust of anything that happens is to get you into treatment. Does it always work? No, it doesn't. I mean, we had hard experiences with that. But I think a major barrier for addicts in this country not coming forward and getting treatment is the stigma, particularly around it's a crime, it's criminal justice. And if we can begin to eat away at that, we will increase the numbers of addicts. There's no reason to believe that American addicts would act any differently than those in Portugal. We'd have to build some more treatment programs, and there'd be a lot of job opportunities for drug counselors, and I was one for a lot of years. It's great work. And, I'd rather be doing that than locking them up.
Could you speak a little bit to the economic effects of legalization?
Here's the deal. We talked a little bit about the farm level, but there has to be a system set up. So I'm picturing license fees and taxes at every level, from the farmer to distribution, manufacturing, packaging, and now at the retail level, whether it's the state marijuana store, like their state liquor stores, or whether it's 7-Eleven or King Quick that has it as one of their products, like in a lot of states, or at the grocery store. So there's lots of controls, particularly on product potency. It's one of the big complaints now about marijuana. What's happened to it over the 25 years? It's not the marijuana that was around when I was a kid. The purity of this stuff has gone through the roof, and people, oh my God. Well, if we legalize it, we're going to set, like we do now with liquor and beer, we're going to set potency levels. The other thing we're going to do is control other ingredients that go into it. If you buy street marijuana now and you smoke it, do you know what you're putting in your body? You don't got a clue. I mean, do we trust the quality control of Bobby Jones down at 14th and Walnut? Come on. I mean, do you think those guys care about that? So if we do that, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on product control, product quality, and this licensing, so people would be licensed to sell. In New Mexico, where they just had medical marijuana, they are setting up a system of farms to grow the marijuana that are going to be leased to nonprofit agencies. So that the nonprofit agency will be part of the distribution network. They will take the profits and plow them back into their particular charity. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think if the government had regulation over all of that, like what chemicals go into it, what goes into it,
Yeah.
anything like that, do you think they'd kind of do the same thing they've been doing recently with cigarettes and adding more chemicals, like fire-safe cigarettes now that just came out? Like, do you think that they'll add things like that?
I would imagine there's going to be a similar kind of process and similar kind of struggles with manufacturers, and because a lot of this research takes a long time. So I would anticipate that there's going to be a lot of struggles over that. And something else to her question about the economics. I just talked about money coming in from taxes, licenses. We would say the estimate is, Leap's estimate, $70 billion a year now spent on law enforcement, court costs, locking up people. And there's a lot of hidden costs in addition to this. If we charge somebody with a drug offense, you now have barriers to getting student loans. You now may have barriers to employment. If we lock you up, that we now got to, in many cases, have to pay to take care of your family, what happens to your future employability and your future economic possibilities? So there's just a tremendous amount of costs that go with this thing that we could, you know, the number one industry that's benefited from this is jail construction. I mean, we've locked up people till the cows come home. New York went from 20,000 people locked up to 60,000 in the space of 20 years. Is the problem any better? No. Ma'am.
If it was legalized, would it be legal to like grow it in your house like yourself to make sure that there were like no trees out of it, or like would that be legal to do?
It would depend on what the rules are, and that's one of my concerns with this, you know, this gray market. That if we don't take the step to legalize it, we've got all these questions out there. Can I grow it in my backyard? My preference would be that people not do it any more than they do bathtub gin. That I think that should be controlled, you know, licensed to do it, that not everybody has a grow operation in their basement and they're set to sell it. But with the medical marijuana market, that's what we've allowed to occur. So we got all these products, you know, very loose regulation. I prefer I mean, these are dangerous chemicals and we ought to have some regulation of them just as we do the alcohol industry. Sir?
I don't know about classified as dangerous. Just because of like the statistics of the things like people who are high do. There are no deaths correlated to marijuana use compared to like the 400,000 a year to alcohol.
Well, I'd argue that there's about 11% of auto accidents that are tested involve people impaired with marijuana. A fair number of fatalities are a result. Sir?
Those accidents are just having marijuana in your system, at least that's how I've understood the statistics. Doesn't necessarily indicate that they were under the influence while they were driving.
You're right, and it's because we don't have a set legal standard with marijuana. So all we know is positive or not. Unlike alcohol, that we've got kind of a measure and a standard that's been set over years. So my belief would be that one of the things that would happen is we'd set some kind of standard that you would be intoxicated at a certain level.
What is like your stance on like the drug testing of that? Because I kind of feel like that marijuana stays in your system way longer than any of these harder drugs. So you're just kind of telling people, okay, well, if you're going to do drugs, don't do the one that's going to stay in your system longer. Do the harder ones that won't.
Look, I'm not advocating anybody do any of it.
I'm not advocating that either. I'm just saying.
But
like,
you're right.
Do you feel that?
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah, it's true that marijuana stays in your body longer. What impact it has, there's a lot of debate, a lot of research on it. You know, you can find the statistics you want to support it. But you know, what we're looking at is what's going to make the situation better now. We can hope about all these other things, but you know, we're faced with a serious problem now. Can we do something that's going to have an impact positively? I mean, we've been doing a war on drugs for 40 years. Has the addiction rate in this country changed at all in 40 years? Almost exactly where it was. How about use rates? Over years, a high school survey out of the University of Michigan, they've been doing it since 1976. Down, up, down, up, down, up. And every year the federal government will come out and say, if it goes from, cocaine goes from 5% to 3%. Cocaine use is down 40% because of what happened to ecstasy and this other stuff. It's largely a function of fad. Aren't drugs faddish? You know, powder cocaine in the 80s, that was, everybody wants some of that stuff, dude. You know, and you know, it's just the faddish nature of drugs. Heroin's making a comeback now. And man, I lived through one heroin epidemic. People had short memories.
How do you feel about the legalization of other non-lethal drugs like LSD or magic mushrooms?
You know, I think those things would have to be looked at individually. For these drugs, which is, again, I'm worried about the bulk of our problem. For these drugs, I would decriminalize all possession offenses. The other thing that happened in Portugal, when they decriminalized possession offenses, police did a much better job of catching traffickers because we don't do that anymore. I think that would happen here as well. And we can put in some harm reduction measures to take care of some of the purity stuff. When I was a kid, there was a free clinic down where the Mad Frog is now, and if you had some dope, you could take it in there and they'd test it and say, throw this in the sewer. No, don't throw it in the sewer, but get rid of it. Don't put it in your body because of what they did. I don't know why, a lot of harm reduction people are doing that now. Voluntary drug testing, safe injection places, provision of needles and worms. All that stuff cuts down on the AIDS, hepatitis, and the other, and that can have an impact as well. Sir.
Care to comment on Cincinnati's change in their marijuana ordinance? You can say no comment or.
What's the change? I must have missed it.
They changed it from a jailable offense to back to state law.
I think it was a good move.
It was cost savings.
Well, state law under marijuana is now a minor misdemeanor. Okay, basically you get a ticket and you pay it out. The reason why, and I was part of this discussion at the police department advocating raising the penalty from minor misdemeanor to a first-degree misdemeanor, because if it's only a minor misdemeanor, we don't have the right to pat you down and search you. Under this, we can write you a ticket, but now we still have search rights on you, and we were finding a lot of guns and other drugs, so that was the idea. But the problem with it is, if you're under a city ordinance and you go to jail, the city's responsible for the cost of it. Under a state ordinance, the county's responsible. So it was a money-saving thing. Sir?
I was actually down at city council when they were discussing this,
right.
And I heard that argument. And I guess my question that I always had was, how are you finding the marijuana if you're not searching them to begin with? Like,
oh, well.
Just giving it to you?
Drive down the street, somebody's like this. Hey,
and the police were saying that they couldn't search because I've
you can't search.
But I've seen police
Minor misdemeanor.
use the smell of marijuana as probable cause to search a car. So why is that different than?
There's a lot of things that go into it. If you write somebody a minor misdemeanor ticket, you have no business going in their pockets unless they're have demonstrated some kind of other threat.
See, I thought you were allowed to pat them down to search for a weapon.
Not for minor misdemeanor.
Well,
if you can, you've got to make the officer safety argument, and you need to make that in a pretty
I know if you
articulate way.
get for a traffic violation, they're allowed to ask you to step out and pat you down because of safety, as a safety precaution, regardless of if it's for,
Depending on the individual circumstances, they may be exceeding their authority or not. I'm not sure.
This is sort of off topic of the marijuana thing, and you might not even know how to answer it. Crystal meth, I'm doing the paper on it, that's why. I think it's one of the different sort of drug problems just because you can make it at home.
Yeah.
Do you see it as being more of like a localized issue, or are people getting crystal meth from other states? Are people mostly going into our pharmacies and making it themselves? Or?
Years ago, the big concern was meth was coming across the country. In about 1995 or 6, we had some guys from Missouri come to do some training for us, and they had documented, it was just coming eastward in some states like Iowa, Missouri. It really was a huge